Scott Fulton, welcome to Tuesdays with Mike. How are you?
Well, I'm better now ever since you popped on my screen, Mike. So thanks for having me and good to see you again.
I'm happy to have you here for our second conversation. Tables are flipped, but it won't have any functional difference uh, to the conversation. Let's keep it going bi-directionally. If you should have questions for me, I definitely have some positioned for you, but I just want to invite dialogue both directions, if you would.
Perfect. That's the kind of conversation where I think people learn more and it's much more interesting for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, since we last spoke on your podcast, your book was released. I want to say January 13th, if I have that correctly. So just about 6 days ago. Certainly a flurry of the limited social media that I partake in. I saw a lot of conversation. How's that going for you?
Great. You never know, right? You spend all the time writing, you're kind of, locked away and, and a launch is important. Obviously, it kind of sets the tone, but ultimately it's still just week one and it's still a small drop in the ocean in terms of how it's going to impact people. But yeah,
Yep.
it's been I've had a few really, really great surprises that, things you don't plan on. But yeah, it's been
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. A wonderful week, busy,
Yeah.
but not time to do some of the other things I would have liked to have done. But no, it's been a great week.
Yeah, excellent. We will definitely get into the depths of your book. I've appreciated what I've been able to consume from it so far. I've got some questions positioned, but let's take a moment to just introduce to at least the viewers for this podcast. Let's introduce Scott Fulton to this viewership a little bit. I know your bio and understand that you've not become an overnight sensation in this. Nobody does such a thing. Tell us a little bit about your journey, if you would, Scott.
I come from a research background, more in the material side, and it's kind of interesting. I was fortunate even then, while I was doing pure and applied science research, to be kind of the go-to guy for applied situations, where I
Mhm.
was kind of flown to different places around North America. We got a problem. We need someone who can distill it down to what's the core issue. You don't have to solve it necessarily, but understand the issue. Who do we need to get involved, and what's a plan to resolve it and get us out of this problem? I have no idea. I think it was just mostly good fortune. I had a couple of really, really good mentors early in my career, and it really set my expectations around what sort of people I wanted to work with and what types of problems I wanted to take on.
Mhm.
I by nature ended up taking on some bigger problems. So engineering research, kind of applied problem solving,
Mhm.
that went on to a couple of multinationals. Some of the consulting work I did was I tell people I'd fly in, arrive wherever it was in the morning. It could be aerospace, it could be manufacturing, transportation. Meet kind of the engineering folks or whoever manufacturing. Meet the leadership. Meet people out on the field. And by noon, I should have a pretty good lay of the land of what the problem was, at least what they perceived it to be from hearing
Mhm.
different issues, and be able to come back to leadership after lunch and say, here's what I see as the two or three things that I think we need to work on first,
Yeah.
validate what different people think. Um, and so I think that really kind of how do I end up doing the kind of work that spills into things like what you're doing
Yeah.
isn't that I have any particular expertise in the functional aspects of like what does this really mean, right, at a
Yeah.
meaningful level of things where you
Mhm.
would and your peers go to. It's more that I hate to use the word holistic because people kind of think it's
Mhm.
not very deep, but the benefit of pulling things together and understanding what's the real issue here. How do we get to the real issue? There's lots of
Right.
things we could do. What do we really need to do? So, kind of to sum it up, I've been in multinationals, been in lots of research roles, and I kind of found myself in 2016. I was at the top floor of one of the largest technology companies and said, this isn't what I want to do. I want to work with the older community to understand why aren't we getting the kind of outcomes. When I say outcomes, I really mean health span outcomes that we really should be. And
Mm.
clearly, we're spending lots of money, we're doing a lot of work around it, but we're not seeing results. What's going on? So it's just kind of that nature of my pattern. And no one else was doing it. I couldn't go knock on the door and say, can I help you? So I just started down that path and started to look at what were the real issues. What aren't we talking to? And when I landed into this area of function, I kind of felt like I just landed in this mountain of enormous information that everyone was looking at, but they're all just kind of working on their little piece, like a big mountain. Everyone's looking at it from different perspectives and they're busy,
Right.
but no one was stepping back and saying, what does this mountain of information really have to say to the everyday
Wow.
person?
Yeah. Yeah, you were literally in that fish to fish, what is water type of conversation. And you're a person that had, again, essentially just entered the waters of health span, but you've looked at so many aquariums over your life in so many different ways that you're trained to actually look at the parameters and understand the viscosity and the material and what's going on, and with your experiences and training, you know how to problem solve differently and to bring novelty to a field no matter what they threw you into, right?
Sure, I'll just get like one example comes to mind. An
Yeah.
analogy of the water might be, the water has moved from 40 degrees to 37 degrees.
Hmm.
And a lot of people get talking about it, what's the change in the water temperature. And while
Yeah.
that temperature is real, how much does it really matter? Like,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of organism you are, it could mean the difference of life and death,
Right,
right? But it
exactly.
doesn't mean the water is suddenly going to disappear. And
Right.
it's big difference between being 33 degrees and 32 degrees,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Change of
exactly,
state.
right. Change in form,
One
right.
degree
Change
now
of
starts
state.
to matter a lot. So that's kind of just the nature of how I have been trained to look at problems and to
Yeah.
try to distill, what's happening in the current of the water. The current is good and
Yeah.
it's bad. All depends on who you are and where you are and what the current is and things. So yeah,
Yeah.
it means I'm used to a very dynamic landscape, I would say,
Yeah.
and I haven't been trapped. And I think what also it means is that I really come with no particular bias, which is so hard for all of us
Yeah.
who are experts, right? Try as hard as we might, biases inevitably come in. And I see it in a lot of kind of, I'll call social media experts who truly are experts,
Yeah.
but they've been at it a long time and they still have their own personal bias around, whatever it is, diet, for example. No, even not just diet. Well, what type of diet? And they're
Yeah.
absolutely passionate about it and they pour their heart and soul into it and they absolutely believe it, but it's hard to get far enough back. And I've just have, I guess I haven't had the luxury of getting caught into any
Yeah.
one avenue. And so for me, data is data. What is the data actually trying to
Yeah.
tell me?
That's very interesting, Scott, because there's some depths in what you've said there too that are that have not been fully discovered. Because sometimes people that are experts in especially management of media are also allowing their customer, listener, readership base manage them, because at some point you have to be careful to keep your audience. You have to speak to what your audience is, according to the data, listening to, engaging with, etc. And so I won't speak for yourself. It sounds though this is the case with you, but for myself and my contributions in the space of especially health span, um, I get to just release what is the information that I'm consuming, what I am synthesizing and attempting to translate into easy applications. And I don't have to worry about offending a customer base, a readership base, etc. I get to experiment with it on myself, listen to it, read it, interpret it, sometimes contribute science to it, but I don't have to worry about the consumer managing me. Is that true for
Absolutely.
you? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's for many, right? It's the price of fame. right?
Exactly.
Fame comes with consequences that you start to find you can't do all the things you want to do. Now,
Hmm.
even somebody like Howard Stern, I would say at times has had to, for someone who we would say is, well, he says whatever's on his mind and does whatever he wants to
Right.
do. Reality is,
Right.
no, he still has constraints too. It
Yeah.
just is maybe less than others. So yeah, I'm quite happy with being able to kind of probably like you have a podcast that people are interested in, but I'm not interested in trying to blow up the world with my face and my information.
Yeah.
I really like the a level of autonomy from any particular group that wants to label me, and I would say that's I use the term label because I think it's a bit problematic because we're
Yeah.
pretty quick to label a lot of things in an effort to try to communicate and articulate and simplify.
Sure.
Labels can sometimes get us
Mm.
tripped up around
Yeah.
how people interpret them and how they kind of sometimes misuse them, particularly once marketing gets a hold of it.
Right. It can be a very reductive world for matters of efficiency, right?
Absolutely.
Um, as we move closer to discussing the particulars of what your new book offers, let's make another step in your journey and talk about why health span matters to you, and what athletic endeavors you personally have engaged in that also give you some touch points in the space of health, wellness, and performance.
Sure. So health span to me, it's a great question, and thank you for it because I think it's a great example. I just talked about labels, right? So we use the
Mm,
label of health span. Well, if I'm
mm,
in medicine and I'm with a group of physicians uh, and probably in the scientists, we're talking about medical health, right? So by
right.
the pure definition, how long do you live without disease, without chronic disease?
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty tall order because
Yes.
people can live with chronic disease and that's managed very well and is not going to be life threatening to them. So that's a very small uh, segment of society who views that way.
Now, I'm going
Most
to
of
put a
us,
pin in that one and come back to it
sure,
because I just heard that 10 days ago on a podcast while I was running. And I'm going to come back to that. Must be without chronic disease. Great point. Keep going.
right? If I ask, anybody on the street or any of my students who are all adults, that's not how they measure health span. Health span is
Mhm.
as long as I can continue to do the things I want to do,
Mhm.
which are largely the things I'm choosing to do now, and the
Yeah.
things that I will need to do. I need to do certain things now, and I know I'm going to need to do some things in later life that'll still protect my independence. And
Yeah.
so long as I'm able to do those, what the doctor puts on the chart, I'm not that concerned about. Health span to me is essentially we could think about it more as independence and identity
Mhm.
around doing the things that we want to do. So you
Mhm.
asked about athletics. I
Yeah.
was a late comer to the world of athletics. It wasn't until my 40s I kind of had my midlife crisis at 40, like lots of people do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And instead of going out and buying a convertible, I bought a bicycle. I
Mhm.
used to love riding my bike as a kid. Had tremendous independence growing up and places to explore safely. And it got me back out and reconnecting with my childhood. And just
Mhm.
by again good fortune, a couple of people asked me to come and ride with them. And I think the
Mhm.
first one was like a very casual rider was good, and the next one was training for Ironman, which I didn't realize it at the time, and I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
And suddenly got pulled out doing these long rides, just like get me home, and I would get on the couch and literally just pass out for a couple
Yeah.
hours, but it did kind of spark something to say that there's more here than clearly what I've been doing, and it introduced me to people who were later in life doing these phenomenal distance sports who were everyday people like accountants and things. I remember watching it was an ABC World Triathlon Championships, and I think he was an 80-year-old accountant, and they were quickly interviewing him when he was in transition between doing the swim and the bike, or between the bike and the run, doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I remember thinking, he's twice my age. If
Yeah.
he can do it, surely I should be able to do something like that. And
Yeah.
so I just started to pursue that. And the more I pursued it, I discovered within myself far more capacity than I had ever imagined was there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was
Mm-hmm.
in me all the time. Not that I was trained to go run a marathon, but
Right.
the potential capacity was there. And I think if I were to say one thing most people have very little awareness is the potential capacity within each of you.
Mm-hmm.
Until you've really explored it, it would be scary to start out and say, you know, everyone should do an Ironman. I actually do the opposite. I say, someone says they want to do an Ironman because they want to come to me for advice and ask them why. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to have a lot of reason to do something, a lot of good reason to do something like that,
Right.
right? So that was kind of, and as I got into that, and the whole multi-sport, which I think was really helpful because you're doing multiple things as opposed to a monosport athlete.
Right.
It just gave me a really unique insight into what's happening, and I understood why multi-sports have been such a so popular in recent years. And I learned so much about myself and my health, and I started to think about managing my health a lot more responsibly because as you test your body, you're starting to find your limits. And it
Mm-hmm.
just really started to open the door to how I think about health and health span and aging.
Wow. That's amazing. And it truly is an amazing response because you started off telling us basically everything in those paragraphs of sentences were completely respectful and continuous and complimentary toward your book. You didn't mention your book once, you didn't reference your book, but your entire answer for how you came to this, which I believe is your second book, right?
Correct.
Okay. Everything you said was it's not found in a medical record, its function, but you didn't reference the book. And then you said people on the street wouldn't identify health span as being at in the absence of chronic disease, which I said we would put a pin in, we'll come back to, because you said it's can I do the things that I want to be able to do and enjoy life. And again, you're talking about function. And then you said, I wouldn't recommend to go out and do an Ironman, that's the Ironman distance triathlon, which you and I both know it's not just any triathlon. We're talking about 140.6 miles. I wouldn't recommend just doing it for the sake of having done it or get a tattoo or put a sticker on your car. You have to have the what? You have to have the function that indicates you'll likely be able to complete this at whatever satisfies you, finish it, be on the podium or whatever. You're in all three of those, you were resonant about the fact that you're talking about function being the most important thing that indicates actually how healthy you are, how competitive you can and should be, participative you are, how much joy you have. I really respect and love that. Now, before I turn it back to you on this, let's come back to that pin. Because as I mentioned, I was running and listening to a podcast where the authority on the podcast said, here's how I define health span. And it was exactly as you suggested, the absence of chronic disease. And I'm a person who's running usually most miles in the neighborhood of about 40 miles per week. And I'm a person with Crohn's disease who's known I've had it for 8 years or more now. Yeah, about 8 years. And I also have a strong family history of it, very strong, and have relatives that have passed away from it. But I have basically no symptoms. It was found incidentally on a colonoscopy. So wait a second. I don't qualify as health span?
Right.
I'm
Right.
56 years old, competitive half marathoner, have been a very competitive marathoner, participate in many other things and triathlon. I've gone podium, after age 40 on many events, multi-sport and monosport. I don't get to have health span because I was incidentally signed myself up for a colonoscopy and have a chronic disease. Time out.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. And the reality is, well, you can kind of flip that The other would be the everyday person out there who's waving the flag about, well, I'm not in any pills, and that makes
Yeah.
me healthy. And the reality is,
Yeah.
to your point, right? No, you just haven't had a diagnosis. Right?
Right.
That
Right.
yeah, right. The absence of medications or a known disease doesn't necessarily make you healthy.
Right.
So we're
Yeah.
really kind of putting unnecessary burden around
Yeah.
some of these things that we really shouldn't. It doesn't help
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah. That's so good already. All right, I'm gonna get cue to one of the questions that I have for you. In some of the materials I've read, you know, I read in your book you talk about function treated during childhood, and those were the words that I excerpted out of context. I want to give you some time to talk about the fact, because I think what I'm reading and what you're speaking to there is that really that's the one of the only times in our lives that we're actually looking at developmental delay. Are you meeting milestones until we actually get to the other end of what society expects from longevity, that we're no longer meeting function we once had? But I don't want to read that in if that's not what you intended. When you talk about function being treated during childhood, is that what you're talking about as developmental milestones then?
Exactly right.
Okay.
You could kind of in the circle of life, if you wanted to say, right? There's
Yes.
that the first maybe 16 years perhaps of life where
Hmm.
we pay close attention to it, and in the last decade or so, depending on what that looks like, or
Right.
whenever someone hits into the later life issues when health span is under threat, is kind of the
Yeah.
is when we start to look at it, and largely in between, unless we're talking about athletics and as a reference
Right.
point, we tend to forget about it, and people, to my surprise, don't seem to realize what we're missing out on by not looking
Hmm.
at that. There's a huge opportunity there
Yeah.
that's fully accessible that we're really not tapping into.
Yeah. That's excellent. And thank you for addressing that. I'm going to move to my second question now, where it's intentionally a two-part question. You can choose to address them in either order you prefer. So, Scott, in your model, you've got several different primary elements, pillars of function. I'm looking for mental health inside those pillars, because I address mental health in my book. I know you have a place for it. Either talk us through those pillars and then tell me where you put mental health, or tell me if you intentionally excluded mental health from function. Talk to me about that, and that'll help our listeners understand your book even a little bit more completely.
Okay, sure. And maybe if I can, I'll just back up a little bit to the
Yep.
research,
Okay.
because
Thank
that's
you.
really where all this comes from.
Hmm.
And as I started to look at the data again, I just went to look for data, right?
Yep.
Knowing relatively little about this world of function, if you will.
Hmm.
And as I started to look at it, what came through were multiple domains of function,
Okay.
right? And
Yep.
so you're focused primarily on the brain aspect of function, I think would be fair to say, and how it interacts with the body. But that's your
Correct.
starting point. Is that fair to say?
100%. And the bidirectionality, because body influences the brain. But I agree with that. Absolutely.
Sure. And so what I started to discover was there's a lot of people working on function.
Hmm.
And as happens in any large organizations or bodies of people, we all tend to get siloed
Okay.
because that's the way we have to manage the chaos that is that ensues otherwise.
Right.
But always everyone knows when you start to silo things, we start to lose opportunities for information transfer between the
Hmm.
different silos. And just to your point,
Hmm.
which you just made around the body and the brain, right? The
Hmm.
bidirectional elements that are at play there. But a lot of people are really just focused on the brain function.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not really look. Yes, they know the interaction that sends signals, but they're really focused on what's going on in the brain. And there's
Right.
other people who are really focused just on what's happening on musculoskeletal,
Hmm.
and they're accepting that there's triggers coming. So as I started to look at it, I said, well, we've got to have some sort of organization to it. And we're really where I resolved were five different domains of function.
Okay.
Most people can handle five. You could,
Yeah.
but if I step back and said five is really distilling down from, if we look at what's going on in the research and clinical environment, it's easy to come up with 30 or 40 subspecialties of function
Right. Sure.
that are all serving very unique purposes, very focused. And it's not that there's no communication going on, but within their subspecialty, they've kind of got their own way of doing things sometimes. They're looking at different things, they're looking for different things, they're interpreting things a little bit differently.
Right.
And so I said, well, there's all this data here. Somehow we've got to organize it. And so what I did was I said, if we had to put it into buckets, how do we start to get the buckets sorted out in terms of function? Not necessarily
Yep.
what people are doing, but how does the body function? And so I really distilled it down to five. So the first being strength and power, which most people I think can understand because we hear so much about the importance of weight training. And then power is really that force over force times distance,
Yeah.
or the time component. And those two kind of interplay together, and they roll into cardiovascular and recovery. Right.
Right.
So those two, for people who are interested in things like VO2 max, they get that, I think, pretty well and should understand it. That's really why we think of VO2 max as the best metric or the gold standard, is because it's a composite functional metric of both strength and power and cardiovascular and recovery. And recovery
Yeah.
is really the cardiovascular system's ability to recover following exercise.
Yes.
Okay, so we kind of separate those two, but then there's mobility and balance,
Hmm.
and you could have a phenomenal VO2 max. Doesn't say anything about your mobility and balance. Right?
Right.
If you don't train those, and I know lots of athletes who, and when I talk about function, they quickly, yeah, I'm on the bike 5 times a week is their answer,
Right.
because they've been
Right.
so conditioned to think that that's what
Right.
function is, or I'm a
Yeah.
runner,
Yeah.
whatever that might be. They've never been conditioned to think about this as a multi-domain view
Yes.
of function,
Yeah.
uh, flexibility and structure. So again, we don't think about that so much, short of disabilities that may happen at some point in life where it
Hmm.
clearly impacts flexibility and structure. Again, until that's more in later life where we see it's, things start, people start to hunch over. So that would be an
Yeah.
example where we see that, where you're
Hmm.
starting to lose structure, you're starting to lose your ability to reach for things. And
Hmm.
then what's really at the center of all, or what's driving it all, is this neuromotor and cognition group. So
Hmm.
that's really what I grouped as the fifth domain, which is clearly
Yeah.
your world in a big way.
Sure.
So it was some way to say, let's start to look at the body as we live in from five different ways,
Hmm.
five different viewpoints, to say, if I'm doing well in all five,
Hmm.
then I know my function is doing well, because lots of my students, older adult students, are saying, yeah, I'm not so worried about my body. It's my brain I'm worried about, my brain
Yeah.
function, right? We don't think about
Hmm.
brain function most times. Most people don't,
Yes.
unless they've, I'm
Hmm.
sure your people do. But they forget that the brain goes through aging at very um, less predictable ways, we'll say, because we
Hmm.
haven't been conditioned to know what to look for. Right?
Okay.
We
Yeah.
may see people slow down in their gait speed.
Hmm.
Watching changes in cognition are less obvious, and we also don't want to see it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a condition there
Confirmation
that
bias. Sure.
we get anxious about. So it's really breaking into those five domains as a way to start to assess more objectively, kind of like when I said earlier, walking into the plant site or whatever, I need to
Hmm.
go look at these different areas and say, which department is really the cause or the root cause of your problem here.
Yes.
And it may
Yes.
not be where you think it is. And
Hmm.
be objective. and just start to look at these areas and see what you discover. So, in many ways, the book kind of is built off of how I've approached problem solving on difficult
Yes.
problems in the past. And
Right.
then within that, try to come up with some standard self-assessment. So I didn't make up any of this. Again, this is pulling from experts like you who have done these things,
Mhm.
and out of those saying, well, which are the ones people could probably do with little or no help? So
Yes.
they can do them on their own for sure, or with help
Hmm.
from a friend. You don't need to get a prescription or go to see your doctor about it. So again, it's not to get to a diagnosis; it's to get insights into how am I doing.
Yeah.
Am I anxious about something that I really shouldn't be? Am I
Hmm.
naive about something that's going on that I probably should have higher awareness? Because if I intervene now at the age of 50 or 60,
Hmm.
I've got lots of time to get on a different trajectory. And so that's kind of, I think, I've given you a long answer here. I'm not sure how well I answered
This
the
is,
two
yeah,
parts of your
that's
question, but
excellent.
that's kind of the
Yeah,
concept.
you've given, each one of those arenas appropriate amount of breadth. And I appreciate the fact that you started with, again, the disclaimer that you've been consistent with. It all comes back to data. Let's catch the second part of that, if you'd like, though, where, just over the last 8 years or so, society has been inclined to appreciate mental health separate from cognitive function. Society has appropriately and thankfully now elevated the importance of mental health. Where do you place that inside? And did the data not wash that out, though?
So I didn't drill too deep in any one area by
Okay.
design, right? I
Okay.
really wanted to keep this with an overriding priority of make it accessible for people
Hmm.
and not get caught in the details. And the idea is, again, in my philosophy and teaching is my goal isn't to answer your question. I,
Hmm.
I don't know that anyone's smart enough to stand up here in front of you and think they would have the answer to most of your questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can help you ask better questions, because you're
Ah,
intelligent, you know how to pursue something once you have a better idea of where to go and what questions to
yeah.
ask. So when we start to, and I don't mean to say splitting hairs between cognition and mental health. It's
Yeah.
more around, again, it kind of goes back to that health span interpretation.
Right.
Do we interpret those as being different, or do we group them together?
Yeah.
Right? It's not a
I
question
can
of what's
fully
right or wrong.
appreciate that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was really kind of where I went to it, and really trying to say from a first principle standpoint, how
Yes.
would we approach this to go to the next level? But I've got some reason to go there, not just I'm not just randomly pulling something out of the air because I heard it on a podcast, somebody talked about
Yeah.
it, which we all
Yeah.
get exposed to.
Right. Right. Fully appreciated. 100% on point. Thank you for the clarification and in agreement. Let's talk just momentarily now about, and I don't mean to say momentarily to restrict the length of your answer. Let's talk about the concept of reserve. You've touched on it indirectly a couple times already in our conversation, and it is poorly appreciated by society writ large. But one of the things that strikes me about what you're bringing to this table of reserve is something that you've talked about the opportunities within your 40s and 50s when people take function for granted. I can get to that later. I'm still functioning fine right now. Just breathe into reserve for a little bit.
Right. So, yeah, I wish for those who are old enough, we used to have a reserve tank in a vehicle. And when you ran
Oh,
out of
yeah.
gas, you could switch it over. Some
Yeah,
vehicles had
that's
that. I
right.
haven't run into
Yeah.
any of those for a long time. It would
Yeah.
work
I
really
learned how
well.
to drive on one of those, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the idea is with reserve is we all know we could do a little more, and you could pick any activity you do in the course of a day, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's going up a flight of stairs. I could have done one more flight. I could have done that flight
Mm-hmm.
of stairs a little quicker if I wanted to. I could
Yeah.
walk a little bit faster. Um, I could have done a little bit more problem solving, but I did it on my phone instead to do the math.
Hmm.
Right?
Oh, sure.
So these are all elements of reserve is there. We don't necessarily tap into it. Right?
Hmm.
So what happens if we take that reserve away, which is kind of your safety net? Right?
Mm.
Strip that away, and now you're going to the maximum and operating to the absolute limit every hour of every day.
Hmm.
That would be pretty scary. I can't
Yeah.
imagine what that would be like. And so the idea of reserve is we've got more horsepower, whether it's cognitive, whether it's functional, and we know it's there to use when we need it. So that might be picking
Mm.
up an object, right? We don't
Yeah.
always need or want to pick up the heaviest object. The idea is we don't, or we probably discount the value of that reserve through midlife because we don't reach for it very often. Unless you're
Mm.
an athlete in a race and you're coming down to the last 10% of the race and you're right on
Yeah.
track, and now you realize, okay, I'm running this last, I've got a personal best opportunity coming up here. This is my chance. You are going
Yeah.
to reach deep into reserve, right? So there's an
Yeah.
example. And so athletics is such a great example, a
Yeah.
metaphor for so many of these things, which we don't necessarily, they're not as obvious in daily life. But um, maybe the other side is where we get used to managing conflict and we realize,
Okay.
okay, I don't have to go in for the fight. I've got enough reserve here in terms of
Mm.
patience and
Yes.
understanding that I'm not going to bite into it and I'm going to reach into
Right.
my reserve and resist engagement.
Right.
Different
Wow.
ways to
Yeah.
think about how reserve
Sure.
works. But the point is, you don't want to reach any point in life, ideally, where you don't have
Mm.
reserve. But
Yes.
ultimately, that is part of what happens with aging, is right. Our reserve starts to come down. Our daily function comes down in many areas slowly, but our reserve starts to come down. And so it's really, if we think about those who do well into health span, get extended health span, it's
Hmm.
because they've got this reserve. They got excess capacity. So when they're at the age of whatever it is, 60, 70, 80, they operate like someone who's younger. So they're at a younger functional age. And it's
Hmm.
that reserve, the excess capability they have that they've built, right? And so we could think about it. I think the great example would, you could probably speak to this far better than me, is the two people who should have Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
Based on brain scans, they look very similar.
Right.
One does and one doesn't. Why?
Yeah.
Right? So you tell us why. I'll let you answer that why because you'll be far more articulate than I will.
Well, you've done, I mean, that is the that is and it's a very common discussion of elevating your cognitive reserve and creating a platform from which disease becomes more difficult to detect. What's commonly discussed in this conversation is the retired college professor who has a very high level of cognitive reserve, who has a fully funded vocabulary and is nimble and timely and still working on grading papers and considering novel thoughts. They've built up such a novel or such a large cognitive reserve that the precipice from which they are eroding does not interfere with day-to-day function. And so no one outside of their very close circles notices that they have lost any capacities or faculties, as it were. And so their cognitive reserve got them all the way through the finish line to the point that they die from some other causation, have lost 20 to 30% of their cognitive function, but lost it from such a high point that nobody even noticed for their day to day responsibilities that they were missing on anything. That's essentially what's discussed typically in this conversation. Yeah.
Right. And I'll give a different example that applies much the same if we think about heart function. I
Okay.
explain this in WellSpan in some detail around,
Mm-hmm.
and it really goes back to associating with high VO2 max. people who
Mm,
do regular workouts and put regular stress, appropriate level of stress on the heart, even
mm.
though they may have a family of heart disease and they may have heart disease themselves. This goes right back to we talked about health span.
That's right.
But because they have invested in exercise regularly, they have developed a far more evolved capillary network within the heart in terms of the arteries that feed the heart muscles. And they've also developed collaterals that even if you get reduced flow, because the body will always want to adapt, it'll start to develop new capillaries and even branch over new arteries to feed
Right.
other parts of the heart, which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But that's really the essence of it. And because, like the brain, the heart is way over designed, way over designed. You
Yes.
look at who qualifies for therapy or treatment for heart disease. You have to have at least 70% blockage
Right.
before they're going to do anything. Think about that,
Or your
70%.
ejection fraction is down under 40%.
Right, right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, just if that sounds kind of crazy to people, the example I use is a paper cut.
Yeah.
What happens in a paper cut? You bleed a little bit, yes, and then the system kicks in to clot and stop the bleeding. And the
Right.
next thing that happens is it sends a signal back to the brain. I need to restore capillary growth in this area, and it starts to
Mm,
redevelop and rejoin new capillaries. And 10
right.
days later, there's the part you're saying, well, I can't even see where it was. But the more
Yeah.
magical part is underneath is that the blood flow's all been restored, even though you
Exactly.
the supply in that region. That's the same thing on a larger scale. It's happening on the heart. So these are the kind of reserves that ultimately will pay you back down the road.
Right. So here's what I find interesting because I love to tell tales on myself that aren't necessarily flattering at all. I went into the initial readings of your work on reserve, thinking that we were going to culminate to a place where you were going to suggest that people of different, let's say, decades or ages or stages of life that we could identify what amount they had in reserve. But if I'm hearing you correctly, and it's very refreshing that it's very much on a personal level. Did you have another repetition in reserve, which is what we talk about in fitness training? Did you have reps in reserve? And you started this off in talking about ascending the stairs. Could you have actually ascended another staircase for example? So it's very much at a personal level. If I'm hearing you correctly, you made it to the end of a 7 day vacation. You were at the end of your reserve, and you talked about this from cognition, etc. So we're not really ascribing societal levels for if you have X capacity, you have an amount in reserve, even though in many of the tests that you talk about in the book, we truly do have age based norms. And theoretically, if you're above the age based norms, you are doing better than average, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you have reserve in comparison with your daily life demands. Speak to that for a moment and feel free to contradict me if I'm wrong about that.
No, I think it's a great point because understanding the individual and understanding population and
Mm-hmm.
where does the individual fit within population, those two things are really different and they're really important to understand
Yes.
because populations are great in terms of understanding trends.
Mm-hmm.
An individual is ultimately where am I within the population? That's good to know. But then also what's my trend? Where am I going?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so part of what I wanted to do was to answer the question is where am I?
Yeah.
Right. And so where am I relative to the world and the world being the population or what we would think of as normative peers? I'm a healthy adult, whatever age. Um, where am I relative to my peers? The same thing actually applies in medicine. I was talking with my brother-in-law, who's a pathologist, and he just came up out of the blue and said this. One of the biggest problems is people don't know where they are. And what he was
Hmm.
saying was they don't know what to do, they don't know what to worry about, they don't know what to focus on because they're just hit with all these things to do, and that becomes paralyzing. So what I
Yeah.
really wanted to do was to go back and say, go back to sports, say, how am I training? So there's two points where we can apply the individual and the population. So you talked about being able to podium, right? You're podiuming relative to a population of peers
Exactly.
at that race.
That just happened to sign up for that
Right.
race.
So that's the population that matters on that day who
Yeah.
showed up at the start line. It's not just you, right? And then you're also looking at your time and say, well, how does that compare to peers of my age?
Hmm.
Like, am I national caliber or am I just, big fish in a tiny little pond?
Exactly.
Right. So it's good to have both of those to understand. And so that's what I wanted to do is to say for all of these self assessments is the first thing is like just to figure where are you? Like or where am
Yeah.
I? I want to get some perspective because I think I'm doing a lot of the right things, but
Hmm.
I don't really know because I'm a fast runner. Well, okay. But running in my 90s probably won't be part of life
Hmm.
necessarily. If it is, great, but that's still only going to be one part. And so I took that and said, okay, so I need to know where I am. And then I need to understand what does percentile mean. And so if we say median, if you want average outcomes, strive for
Hmm.
median or 50th
Yeah.
percentile.
Hmm.
I doubt very many people who follow you are interested in being average. They're probably interested in something above average, right? Because they're looking for that cushion, right?
Yeah.
Or what we could call reserve, depending on how we view it. And so what I
Hmm.
did was I said, well, we don't need to break it down and get into the detail of am I 57, am I 64 percentile? I looked at it and said, what's reasonable for people to interpret fairly quickly? And so I said, 75th percentile is quite good. It's not
Hmm.
exceptional or elite, but in the world of health span, you don't need to be elite. If you're elite in one
Right.
thing, in all likelihood, it's at the loss of something else, right?
Right.
We're
Right.
too focused. So I use the runner who's a great runner, and maybe they're a national level runner. Chances are their flexibility, right? Would say in runners, that's a common challenge. Flexibility is
Yeah.
weak. And so
Hmm.
that's ultimately will be their problem. So that's where I'm kind of trying to play this element
Yeah.
of the individual and the population. It's good to understand both, but at the end of the day, it's the individual that matters because that's the one we're trying to take care of.
Yeah. I love it. And I've often said, and I've been quoted as to have said, statistics are for populations, not for people.
Right. Right.
You can
And
understand kind of some generalities of where to head, but you've told us so far many times already today, your goal is to empower an individual because they're spending time with themselves, and when empowered, they can see opportunities and do better for themselves.
yeah, at the end of the day, n equals one, and you're the one
Yes,
who's going to have to live with you down the road.
right. Now, this very serendipitously came to my next question, which is well positioned just because of what you've been saying in or what you just spoke of. So I have to ask you, does having reserve function and knowing that I have function in reserve right now, I'm at a fitness for all of those pillars, uh, create a space where what we can do is afford ourselves an opportunity to balance our driving approach toward more and better and what do I need to work on today so that we could hedge against age expected losses. And we call that, as you well know, loss aversion, and to position ourselves so at times we can program in for recovery, meaning how much does having reserve do for someone and indicate that they are permitted an opportunity to recover in whatever form they are, inclined to do: sleep, nap, rest, play, take a day off, mentally check out, etc. What do you think about that? Does somebody need to have a bank that's built up in reserve in order that they are permitted to play or sleep or rest, or do you think it should be programmed in as part of building a reserve? Where does that belong?
Sure. So the way I look at it is the hormetic effect.
Yes.
So we're not going to get beyond, we'll say arbitrarily, 75th percentile. We'll
Hmm.
say you could get to 75th percentile if you just live a good quality of life and you don't specialize and you don't push yourself too hard anywhere.
Hmm.
And you can do quite well.
Yeah.
But if you have a goal to get beyond that, and we'll say 90th is again within reach for a lot of people,
Sure.
not all, but for whatever genetic condition predisposition you may have,
Right.
um, in order to get beyond, I'll say 75th, again, somewhat arbitrary, you will have to start to now push beyond and pull into that or reach into that reserve.
Hmm.
And the only way you'll get that reserve to go up is through recovery,
Yeah.
right? It's the stress and recovery cycle because that's the hormetic effect that we know that from everything, whether we're talking about how the brain works or
Yeah.
how the body works or how you're going to go do the marathon. I'm going to rest up for the marathon for 6 months so that I'm show up fully rested and let me know how that works out, right?
Right. Right.
But flip it around and say, well, like I'm doing 40 miles a week, so I've got to turn my mileage up. And so
Yeah.
every week I'm going to add more miles, more miles, and more miles. And by the time the marathon comes, I'm doing 150 miles a week. And you showed up for the marathon, and it was just basically another training run.
Right.
And you kind of say, well, what happened? Well,
Yeah.
you never gave yourself a chance to recover, so you never got better. You
Yeah.
just got really good at doing high mileage every day,
Yeah.
and it just kind of flatlined, right?
That's a beautiful perspective depending on the individual's goals. 75th, 90th, you need to structure yourself accordingly, and you're not going to make it to 90th if you don't rest and recover. And if you're shooting for 75th percentage, there's space built in for that as well, but they're two different approaches. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
excellent.
it's not to say one is better than the other,
No,
right?
no.
If and for that matter, if median is your goal, there's nothing wrong with that. Like you're doing as well as at least half the population. That's not terrible. It's not good enough for me. I never
Yeah,
aspired to be average. It was like the biggest like we're all searching for some identity in some way, and maybe
right.
that's where I was always coming from. But at the same time, if being the very best is your goal, you're going to get a lot of disappointment. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
room in between there for all of us to do pretty well and have some really good outcomes.
Yeah. Okay, I've got what I believe to be a challenging opportunity for you here, and I have faith in your capacity to answer this well. Let's go back for a moment and address potentially two different hypotheses that could be running parallel. Let's go with the college professor. She's taught at a university level. She's, still publishing papers. She has a lot of reserve brain function. We'll globalize that. Talk about mental health, cognitive faculties, memory, attention, executive function, etc. She's there. In parallel, let's talk about her twin sister, who is remaining intelligent but has devoted herself to being the same 73-year-old, they're twins, and who has reserve in physical fitness as you break them out. flexibility and structure uh, and strength and power and aerobic capacity. We have both of these individuals that have reserves in their own preferential sectors. Okay. You've spoken in the book that function is more important than proxies and biomarkers. I'm going to tell you I agree with that as well. Here's what I'm going to pose to you as the challenging question, though. If we rely, and again, this is an intentional straw man being reductive, if we rely solely on function, but we have two individuals who with that have functional reserve, and we are not looking at proxies and biomarkers, are their functional reserves going to potentially mask things that we could have found are changing in their system functions that could have been found by proxies and biomarkers, because we won't find it in function because they're too, quotes, functional. I can reframe that if you need, but what are your thoughts if I've elucidated that well?
Right. So if I understand your question, I think where you're going with it is more what we would describe as the body's functional systems in terms of the cardiovascular system as a operating system, the
Mm-hmm.
nervous system, the immune system. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Correct, 100%. Let's
Right.
go with that. I appreciate that. And yes.
Right. So I kind of split those out and say there are by necessity proxies that we use around blood markers, okay,
Mm-hmm.
which are disease focused. So I've really taken to say we're not talking about disease here. It's kind of like our with the health span discussion we started with. Right?
Right.
We're not talking about disease here. That's another set which runs in parallel.
Mm-hmm.
But disease also isn't looking at function,
That's right.
right?
Okay, I'm on with you.
Right. So all of those, most of those blood markers we get are still proxies, and that's the best we can do reasonably, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll follow that through the medical path to decide if there's some medical condition. So I don't discount any of those. Okay.
Nice.
So when I say proxies, I'm using things like we'll say something like a biological clock, where
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at the epigenome of an individual and we're making assumptions around that, and the assumptions are valid,
Yeah.
but they aren't direct; they're indirect, right?
Yes.
So they're largely associations that we're talking about,
Yeah.
and so those are the things we've heard are coming through, and we could look at even our smartwatch, right? My
Mm-hmm.
smartwatch is it's a very good Garmin, and it gives me all sorts of information. So one would be around VO2 max. Is it
Mm-hmm.
measuring blood oxygen and CO2 exchange? No, right?
Yeah.
It's 100% a proxy. It's
Yes, absolutely.
it's evaluating my sleep based on an algorithm full of all sorts of
Right.
errors and assumptions. Is it accurate? Sometimes it seems reasonable, and other times it's like, what were you doing last night?
Yeah.
Right. So those are the proxies I'm saying that we need to be careful of thinking just because they're giving us information
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's reliable. So those are the proxies that I think we're led to want to, or we're told that they are really
Mm.
informative. And
Right.
just because they're data doesn't mean it's quality data or particularly informative. So
Yeah.
it quickly gets muddy for people. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
understanding of the difference of sometimes you have to use a proxy because it's not realistic to go in and check your heart every time you go,
Right.
right,
Right.
to do that test. Versus the things I've tried to call out in function are the things that apply to everyday life. Like, can
Right.
you reach for that thing up on the counter, up on the upper cabinet? How much further could you reach for it? Can you reach to
Mm-hmm.
tie your shoes or can you not? And so that's going to say, how long will I be able to do those things? There's no better
Mm-hmm.
way than to do the actual method or the test or the function that you're going to be doing every day is
Yeah.
to measure that directly, to measure gait speed directly, because you're going to still want to walk. There's no better method to measure your walking speed
Yeah.
than measuring your walking speed.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So this is great because you're helping us understand that there are two separate fields of medical health and wellness and HealthSpan has the ability to umbrella over both. And you're helping us to understand that proxies can be effective screening tools. They can be, basically your carbon monoxide detector of your house as a proxy of you might want to get that checked because we didn't know the levels were going up, but this is now telling us that the level is crossed over. And you're telling us that functional assessments are rubber meets the road. Are you getting it done on a daily basis? Should you have some capacity for flexibility in your life, not flexibility in your body, but again, reserve, the ability to have fun rather than you are only able to have enough energy, strength to be able to just get by. You have reserve, and you're not trying to replace medical biomarkers at the same time that shouldn't be taken ultra regularly, should not be fixated on, have a degree of expense, and to some extent have some risk to them as well. We don't have to test your cholesterol level every day, but we do have some capacity to learn a lot about you when we look at a comprehensive panel of function.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the other
excellent.
proxy I'll just throw out there just to throw a little bit more wood on the fire is diet, right?
Uh-huh.
A dangerous proxy where people are so fixated on their diet that they think
Hmm.
that will guarantee health, right?
Right.
Diet is absolutely important. Again, it's not to say it's not important,
Yeah.
but if we're not looking beyond that of all of the both the biomarkers in terms of the health and the functional aspects, we're clearly operating without a lot of information that is readily available.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I love you're always very data driven and you're looking at things from a novel perspective that's refreshing and healthy. Uh, with all of that said, I'm going to now pivot toward an arena that you and I have positioned ourselves to talk about from my appearance on your podcast and in our sideline email discussions. Let's talk about uh, how we can test cognitive function. And I want to start off with going back to what's in your book, the tests that you are recommending that are easy for people, they're approachable. And let's make certain that we're putting a disclaimer that if somebody wants to come in and be contradictory and they say, Scott Fulton is here standing just saying, I'm not trying to give you the best test that can be possibly designed and conducted by a neuropsychologist or otherwise. I'm trying to give you tests that are approachable that you can do on your own. With that space and disclaimer, Scott, let's breathe just a little bit into the realm of cognition, and then we'll potentially look into divided attention and see how that reflects cognition as well. Go ahead.
Sure. And part of my driver for this, again, teaching adults is that while we all understand disability, we can see that in our
Mm-hmm.
peers around us, in our parents, for example. What we can't see nearly as well, which I think I alluded to earlier, was cognitive decline. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I have students come to me and say, well, how can I get some tests for this? And it's the most difficult one to get tested because
Mm-hmm.
typically you need a diagnosis from somebody before you can go to get tested. So it's a bit of a catch 22, right? Which is, again, what the system is designed around is we're here to fix things that are broken, not to try to tell you what your current health is largely or what you're tracking towards. So what I wanted to do was to say, as you set up perfectly, it was what are some things people can do to get some early insights, if for no other reason, to get comfortable with there are ways of doing some screening evaluations. Again,
Mhm.
none of these things are going to give you a diagnosis, and that's not the point. The point
Right.
is to give you some familiarity with it, to give you some empowerment over there are some things you can do and actively look at, and you can now start to say, well, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to do that anyway. And I think that's potentially the most exciting part is in cognition is
That's
because
engaging.
there
Yeah.
are some
Hmm.
fun things to do, right? So
Right.
kind of jumping forward to something like why is pickleball so exciting? And why is it all the rage?
Hmm.
A lot of it is the cognitive aspects of pickleball.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what turns people on.
Yeah.
Happens, if you can do it without getting, injured knees and things,
Yeah.
um, everything else about it is really healthy.
Yeah.
So, so it was really to say what were some things that we could start to do, and it's really now largely trying to overlay some cognitive load on top of some physical activity. So part of
Hmm.
it is the physical aspects of the first four really set the
Hmm.
foundation for now. Let's start to throw some cognitive load on top of that. And you can see
Okay.
how these two play together. And you'll start to where we went at the very beginning was this
Yeah.
interplay between the two and the interdependence between
Right.
all of them, really, but the cognition piece. And so we're trying to take some of the black box and at least open it up a little bit to give you a look inside to say, no, you've got some influence on here. It's not just, fait accompli or it's, whatever will
Hmm.
be, will be. You've
Yeah.
got some knobs you can turn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. And it's remarkable because I was just up in Portland, Oregon yesterday teaching a 7-hour course on what I call neuropracticity, play on the word neuroplasticity. How do we practice neuroplasticity in rehabilitation? And one of the things that we were doing there was divided attention so I could help the attendees to be able to see, okay, I can measure an individual's critical speed for what I did in front of the audience, walked 30 feet across the room, sat down in a chair 30 feet away, got back up, and essentially walked briskly back. And somebody measured my walking speed. And then we sat down and we measured my ability to subtract a double digit number that was a surprise to me. I had somebody from the audience generate double digit number, and I said between 11 and 19 from a triple digit number. And that was going to be a surprise to me as well. And I was only going to be given as much time as the walk took me. So now they measured my cognition in a proxy manner in one way, and we found out how many times I could calculate that in 10.85 seconds. I like to challenge myself on that, but the attendee gave me a 12 to subtract from 487. It's not all that difficult to subtract 12. And I did those in a decent amount of rapidity. But here's exactly what you just got through saying. Now we're going to couple those two together. So the third measurement is the walk and the subtraction with two new sets of numbers. And this time they gave me subtract 17s off of 491. Okay, I got this. I can do it. But you want to talk about cognitive reserve, it's actually being measured right there. What am I going to subtract from? Not mathematically subtract from, but what am I going to prioritize? Did I keep up my walking speed? Did I keep up my calculation speed? Was I able to do both? And is this a way that we can help individuals in a very no instrumented fashion be able to get a glimpse into their reserve is looking at divided attention because it represents a lot of capacities. I'll let you speak to that for just a moment.
Perfect. And those are some of the examples of what I have in the book because All it required was someone with a probably with a phone with a timer on it, right?
Yep. Yep.
And if people are thinking, if you weren't going to say already that you should get the same time, no, right? Right.
Right.
We expect some reduction, well, reduction in walking speed
Hmm.
or longer time to do the math example. The
Yep.
question is how much, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
that's what we're looking for is what's that decay or the difference or the delta? What's that
Yeah.
look like? That's what we're looking for. But you have to have, again, goes back right back to what we talked about earlier. There's the individual, right?
Hmm.
You may be very good at walking, but geez, I haven't done math in 40 years, Scott.
Yeah. Right.
Right? It's just not part of what I do.
Right.
Right. So and that's what we're trying to do is to do some things that are outside of the norm. And yes, if you want to practice math tables and multiplication tables and things, you will get better and you'll have
Yes.
some benefits for it. But ultimately in that test, well, we're going to do something else then. Right?
Right.
We're going to
Right.
choose animals that have red noses or right? Things that are going to,
100%.
yeah, make you think
Yeah.
harder. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are excellent measures, and those are exactly what I'm trying to offer to people is simple
Hmm.
ways to get some understanding of this is what life is. Life is never one activity at a time. Right?
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
as like we're driving a car, look at all the things we're taking in as we move forward. We've got what's in front of us, the peripheral information. What do we need? What do we need to filter out?
Yes.
99% of it probably, right?
Right.
We're slowing up to an intersection. At what point are we going to put our foot off or take it off the brake, put it on the gas? All these normal things that we take for granted will become more challenging as our basic processing speed goes down and our reserve comes down in future years. So perfectly as explained earlier by you, the higher we start from,
Hmm.
better off we're going to be at whatever age we're talking about.
Right. Right. And what a poignant point without being alliterative that you made there. That, hey, I'm the one that chose 2-digit and 3-digit subtraction for the audience. That's my wheelhouse. Okay. But that may be completely distasteful for some people. But if you try to give me 6 or 7 letter words to spell backwards while I was doing that, that type of divided attention. It's person specific and it has to be engaging for an individual to put themselves up to even see that a measure has validity. This is ridiculous to do this. Oh, that's fun to do that. I want to name as many species of fish as I should find in a lake in Michigan is engaging for some people. And that's the list that they should be attempting to either memorize or iterate as they're walking. So you're exactly right. There's statistics and then there's people and it has to be engaging and it has to represent the type of function that is important for them to hold on to.
And I'll
Yeah.
use a simple one. If you're the grocery shopper in the family and you're
Right.
used to putting everything down on the list, take the list with you, but what if you don't pull it out of your pocket or your purse?
Right.
And when
Yeah.
you're all done, before you head to the checkout, pull the list out and see how you did. Simple
Yeah.
test, right? Of
That's
just a way,
exactly
right?
what I recommend people to do. And I'd say put a list of paper, put a list on a piece of paper, put it face down on a table, go out for a walk, iterate the list as many times as you want, come back on the blank side of the paper, write every one of them down you can remember, and compare. Challenge yourself. It's super easy because you can program for this as well. Uh, Scott, this has been a masterful discussion on your part. I appreciate the time that you've taken to help us breathe into what you've put into the book. You've put a tremendous amount of time into it. It's reflective and based on data. It has reality basis, which is probably the strongest attribute that it has. And that's saying a lot because it comes with a novel perspective from outside the sector, which is extremely healthy. Do you want to wrap up with anything else, any other piece of advice besides buy the book that you would give to our audience?
Well, you failed to ask me the one question that everybody always asks. What's the one thing I should do?
Yeah, well, I feel like that's too reductive, but go ahead.
No, but
You
it's
were prepared
always
to answer that.
well, no, it's the classic in a discussion like this. Well, we talked about a lot of things, but what's the one thing I should, the one
Yeah, right,
takeaway,
right.
right?
Like
And
fast
and
forward to the end.
and in the past, I would always say, I don't like the question because there is no good answer to it because it's too individual.
Yes,
Thankfully, with function, I can answer that question. And the one thing you should do is figure out what your blind spot is or what's your weak
yes,
link, because that's
yeah,
ultimately where the biggest opportunity is for you. And you'll only know by doing a bit of self assessment to figure that out on your own. And you'll be the one that will learn about it in the privacy of your own home and the one with some ideas on how to go forward with that information.
wow, that's powerful because again, you've summed it up. You're empowering people.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
there is so much that's challenging about aging already. Society doesn't make it easier for people. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm not suggesting anything is sugar coated, but I'm saying there's a lot of things like this that we can do that will
Right,
really make a significant difference or as much difference as you want to have it make in your life.
right. Excellent. Scott Fulton, the book is Function, and it is that straightforward. And I'll put some links to it in the show notes. I appreciate your time, and we will, certainly be all blessed and empowered by consuming this and informing ourselves for our own blind spots. Thank you.
Mike, thanks for having me. I just think that the work you've been doing your whole career is such a contribution, and almost that it's now finally time that things are really going to flower. Even though as busy as you've been, I suspect the next decade is going to be a real awakening in a lot of areas that you've been preparing for. So thanks for having me, and I've enjoyed being with you and your audience.
Very welcome. Take care.